National parks are some of the most beautiful and peaceful places in the world. But when you're miles from civilization, alone with the wilderness, it doesn't take much for that peace to turn into fear. These are three terrifying true stories from people who went into the woods expecting adventure and found something much darker instead. I worked as a seasonal park ranger in a remote area of Washington state. The place was thick with woods, miles from the nearest town. Most visitors were hikers, campers, or loners looking to unplug for a weekend. But there was one area we never recommended: an unmarked trail past Pine Creek. It wasn't officially closed, but something about it always felt off. Even in the daylight, the woods there seemed darker, quieter. Late one evening, I got a call on the radio from a panicked man who'd gone hiking alone. His voice was shaky, but clear. He said he was being followed. I asked for his coordinates, but the signal was weak and kept cutting out. The last thing he said before static swallowed him was, "It's not human." We mobilized a search team at dawn. We eventually found his backpack torn open near the base of a ridge. Weird thing was, his gear was scattered, but there was no sign of a struggle. No blood, no tracks, nothing. Just this eerie silence that blanketed the area, like even the birds knew something was wrong. 3 days passed. Then one of the other rangers, Collins, came back to the station looking pale as death. He said he'd seen someone walking the unmarked trail, barefoot, shirtless, eyes wide like he was in a trance. But when Collins called out to him, the man just stared and smiled before walking straight into the brush. We went back the next day to check, but there were no footprints, nothing. The man who called never turned up. Officially, it was listed as a missing person. But off the record, we stopped sending anyone near that part of the forest. Some of the older rangers talk about an old local legend, something about the Watcher in the Pines. I never put much stock in folklore, but after that season, I transferred out. Something lives in those woods, something that watches and waits. In 2016, my cousin Jake and I took a road trip across the country. Our goal was to hit as many national parks as we could in 3 weeks. One of our stops was Big Bend in Texas Gorgeous, desolate and insanely hot. That night, we camped near a spot called the Devil's Den, a canyon that local guides warned wasn't good for night hikes. They joked it was where the rocks whisper, but we brushed it off. After dinner, Jake went to relieve himself in the woods while I cleaned up our campsite. 5 minutes passed, then 10. I called out his name, figuring he just went a little further for privacy. No answer. I grabbed my flashlight and went looking. When I found him, he was standing perfectly still, facing a cliff wall like he was in a daze. I said his name and he didn't respond. I touched his shoulder and he jumped like I'd shocked him. He was pale and sweating. He whispered, "Did you hear it?" I asked what he meant. He just shook his head and said, "We need to leave, right now." Back at the tent, he barely spoke, just sat with his flashlight on all night. Eventually, he told me that while he was in the woods, he started hearing someone calling his name softly, from the rocks. It sounded like me, but it came from all directions. Then the voice started to mimic other people, his mom, his girlfriend. He said it didn't sound right, like it was repeating phrases it didn't understand. At one point, he said he turned around and saw someone crouched between 2 rocks. He could only see the silhouette. It was whispering, but his mouth never moved. The next morning, we packed up and left. We didn't even finish the trail. On our way out, we passed an old ranger who looked at us and said, "You boys didn't camp near the den, did you?" We didn't answer. He nodded slowly and said, "They always whisper when they want someone new." Back in 2009, I volunteered for a summer program that helped maintain trails in remote parts of Glacier National Park. We stayed in a backcountry cabin accessible only by foot. No cell service, no internet, just a sat phone and radios for emergencies. One night, around 2 a.m., I woke up to what I thought was a coyote howl, but it sounded weird. Longer, higher pitched. It echoed unnaturally through the trees. I peeked outside and saw one of our guys, Mark, standing in the clearing, staring into the forest. I figured he was just taking a leak or something, but after a few minutes, he hadn't moved, not once. I opened the door and called out to him. He didn't turn around, just stood there. When I reached him, he looked wrong. His eyes were glassy, and his lips were moving like he was whispering to himself. I put a hand on his shoulder and he collapsed. He started crying and shaking, saying, "Don't listen, don't look at his face." He wouldn't sleep for the rest of the night. Next morning, he told us he'd heard someone walking around our cabin, whispering his name. He thought it was me playing a prank, but when he opened the door, he saw someone crouched by the tree line. Said it looked like a person, but his arms were too long. Its face was wrong, like something wearing skin that didn't fit. He tried to go back inside, but it whispered something that made his body go numb. He didn't remember walking into the clearing, only that the closer he got to it, the louder it whispered. We radioed a chopper the next day and hiked out early. Mark never went back. Neither did I. Funny thing, when I asked a ranger years later about that area, he went quiet. Then said, "We don't go north of Silver Pass anymore. Too many disappearances." He never said more, but I never forgot the look in his eyes. In 2021, my girlfriend and I visited Shenandoah National Park for a long weekend. We rented a secluded cabin just a few miles from the Skyline Dravino neighbors, no cell signal, just us and the mountains. It was supposed to be romantic, peaceful, a break from everything. But the second night, something happened that still keeps me up. We spent the day hiking and got back to the cabin around dusk. While she cooked dinner, I gathered firewood out back. As I walked deeper into the trees, I started hearing something. Faint at first, like someone humming. I figured maybe it was another hiker or some weird echo, but the sound kept following me. No matter where I moved, it was always just behind the trees. Always the same melody, like a lullaby. I dropped the firewood and jogged back to the cabin. That night, the air felt wrong, heavy, still. We didn't have a television, so we played cards and listened to the wind in the trees. At around 11, the wind completely stopped. Not a single sound outside. My girlfriend was about to go to bed when we heard it. Footsteps on the gravel outside. Slow, crunching, pacing around the cabin. I peeked through the curtain and saw nothing, just the moonlight on the porch. But the footsteps kept going, sometimes pausing, then circling again. We turned off all the lights and sat there, frozen. Then we heard the back door creak. It was locked, but we hadn't closed the shed door earlier that day. I grabbed the axe we'd brought for firewood and went room to room, whispering to her to stay quiet and out of sight. We sat like that for over an hour. No more footsteps, no knocking, just silence. In the morning, we found small prints in the dirt, barefoot, human, but off, like the toes were too long. The stride was strange, like whoever or whatever had walked wasn't quite used to walking. That would have been weird enough. But later, as we packed up, my girlfriend showed me something on her phone. Even though we had no signal the whole time, she somehow had a new voice memo. 1 minute and 14 seconds long. She didn't record it, neither did I. It was the humming I'd heard in the woods. Soft, crackly, and wrong. We left that day and never looked back. Sometimes, when she's asleep, I still play the recording. And in the background, if you turn the volume all the way up, you can hear something breathing.